Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
A certain event happened to me several decades ago. Summer 1970 in the Georgian Bay, Ontario, Canada region. I believe the incident should be told. Other than my immediate family and a couple of close friends, I've never told this story to anyone. It was around 2 a.m. and I saw in the northwestern sky 5 objects flying in a V formation towards the southeast. I had to tell myself that it was only a dream, but as the objects got closer I realized that what I was seeing was real. As the objects approached closer to me on the shoreline, I had the most amazing feeling that something or someone was trying to talk to me from them. At this exact moment, a voice or presence spoke clearly to me that I was in danger. No exaggeration here, a creature seemed to appear before me as if it was hovering over me. It stood like 8 or 9 feet tall and was exactly in appearance to what other witnesses have described as a praying mantis with large oily eyes. While this entity spoke to me by thought alone, I felt oddly at ease with it rather than terrified, for it seemed genuinely concerned for me. It told me that I was dying of a drug overdose and that I should seek medical help. My mind was totally clear at this moment, with no effects from the recreational drugs I regularly take. I knew that the entity was telling the truth and I listened. What happened next was incredible. The entity spread out its long insect arms and wrapped them around the back of my head. Suddenly, I felt a jab like a needle in the area of the brain called the medulla. It totally was clear of thought and strong. I don't have any memories of what happened to the entity or the hovering objects. The next thing I knew, I was running from the beach to the highway to hitch a ride to the hospital, where I checked myself into the emergency ward. I had my stomach pumped and remained there for 3 days. My family and friends heard my story and dismissed it, but what happened a short few weeks later has disturbed me since the event. People in the area where I lived began phoning in reports of strange lights appearing over Georgian Bay, flying in V formation. Perhaps a month or so later, there was a report on the local radio of a secret underwater U.S. military base in the Georgian Bay off the shores of Meaford. An interesting note on this is there is a Canadian military base in Meaford Artillery. For a week or two, this was the talk of the county, with people calling into the radio station for more info, but the story was never repeated on air and seemed to just fade away. This event has stuck in my head as clear as the day it happened, and as time goes on I hear similar stories being recounted by others. Another event that perhaps surpassed this is what I witnessed over a period of 3 days over the Shuswap on Lake Nipissing 4 years ago. This time I wasn't alone and clear of mind. It can be extremely worrisome to experience these kinds of events, and often we feel that nobody else seems to care or understand. But even if 100 UFOs should land on Parliament Hill tomorrow, we all have to get up in the morning, feed ourselves, and carry on our daily routines. I no longer fear the unknown and embrace the beauty of this universal plane.
When I was 8 years old, I had a bad case of the measles, so my mother quarantined me in a small bedroom in the center of the house. It was a fitful night. I was awakened by a dim light in my bedroom and my eyes began to focus. Coming out of the bedroom walls were what appeared to be giant termites, probably 5 or 6 of them. The insects looked to be 3 feet tall and had large almond-shaped black eyes. Their bodies were translucent. They surrounded my bed. Suddenly, a larger entity came through the wall and stood at the foot of my bed. I remember feeling paralyzed. The last thing I remember is waking up the next morning. The next night was a repeat of the previous night. I remembered screaming for help the night before and no one came. I screamed the second night and it brought no help either. I later questioned my mother and she revealed that she had heard nothing, and she told me that it was probably just the fever. Fever or not, about 3 days later, I developed a sore spot on the inside of my right lower leg. It became infected and started to hurt, so my mother took me to the family doctor. He was a small town doctor and he looked at the spot on my leg. He drained it when he noticed a foreign object embedded in my leg. He didn't seem to be too concerned about it, and he matter-of-factly probed around and removed an 1/8 of an inch sized chunk of metal. I'll never forget the clank it made in his specimen tray. It was shaped like the tip end of an 8-penny common nail. Was it some type of tracking device? He bandaged my leg up and I was left with a scoop-shaped scar to this day.
I was coming back from work in 2014, about 1:30 in the morning. I pulled up to the driveway and something caught the side of my eye. I walked up the stairs, went to the window. I live on the 2nd floor. I looked out the window across the street and I saw a crypto, if you will, a Mothman-type insectoid. Small body, unusually large head, normal, no red eyes, and it kept staring. I went to make tea, fed the cats, came back, rubbed my eyes to see if I was tired and saw things, and sure enough, it was there. One important thing, there was no foreboding fear. None whatsoever. That I found interesting. I was shocked as many people had seen similar things. I went several times. I would say about 4 to 5 times, just peeking outside, looking at the window, and it just stood there. I live in a small town near Chicago. I figured the police would do their rounds or someone would see it. You could hear a pin drop. It's a very small community. Sure enough, no one was around. It did not faze me to take a picture. I did have a smartphone at the time, right? But overall, no fear, and absolutely, you're just there in the shock because you just can't believe what you're seeing. You listen to accounts, but you never think you will be in that situation. I went back several times. I was listening to your show that night, peering out every now and then. It just kept standing there. In the morning, I went to see any trace of anything. It was gone, so yeah. Above all, I would say the strangest thing would be I was not afraid at all, and it shocks me to even say that now. Thinking back over the several months and years, I talked to friends. They have an interest in it. I kept thinking it was crouching like a runner would be, so it could have been taller, as many people claim it to be 6 or 7 feet. It was almost as if definitely the body was much smaller and the head came to a point. Almost as if, you know the old cartoons from Mad Magazine, Spy vs. Spy, with the nose, if you will, comes into like a parrot's or a bird beak, but there's no beak. So it is very kind of pointed protruding face, if you will, but again, there are no eyes and there are no facial features. But again, in that humanoid design, that's where the face would be, of course, so yeah, but the head was much bigger than the body. I guess just by seeing this small body and large head, as odd as it was, I wasn't going to go outside and even look outside. I felt safe at home, hoping that it might not be seeing me look to the window.
I had an experience in 1993 that has bothered me ever since. My husband was involved but didn't see anything even though he was in the bed next to me. The only person I told was my personal physician the very next day. At the time, we lived in a 2-story house on a dead-end cul-de-sac in Seattle, Washington, about 5 miles from the SeaTac airport. It was sometime in late October or early November of 1993. It occurred in the middle of the night, about 2 a.m. My husband and I were asleep. I was on the side of the bed facing the outer bedroom wall, and my husband was asleep next to me. I woke up and rolled over, bringing the bedroom doorway into my view. The hall light was on outside the bedroom, so I had a clear view of the doorway. I saw something standing in the bedroom doorway. It was very tall, and I got the vague outline of some kind of robe-like clothing. I sat straight up in bed, grabbed my husband's arm and shook him, shouting, "There's something in the doorway." My husband bolted out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat he kept next to the headboard, but as soon as I had shouted out, the thing was gone, just gone. I was near hysterical, and it took a while for my husband to calm me down. I told him I had seen something in the doorway. He checked the house, but of course there was nothing there. Everything was locked up tight. I felt like I was losing my mind. I apologized for scaring him like that and waking him up yelling. I don't really remember anything about the rest of that night except that I was very upset and couldn't get back to sleep. I was very, very scared. I knew I had seen something. I didn't trust that if I went back to sleep that it wouldn't come back. The next morning I phoned my doctor and left a message asking him to phone me back. I told him in the message that I thought there was something really wrong with me. When he phoned me back, I broke down in tears, telling him that I felt like I was losing my mind. I told him that I know I saw something in my bedroom doorway in the middle of the night. It was real, I had seen it, but it wasn't possible that anything was there. He asked me what I had seen, and I told him it was a thing, or a man, or something. He said that if a person is under stress, we had started our business earlier that year, it was possible to be dreaming, but you're waking up and you think you see something. He prescribed some medication for my nerves and told me I should try to forget that it had happened. I was left with this feeling that I didn't really know what I had seen. It happened so fast. I tried to forget that it had happened, but of course I never could. A few months later, I sat down at the table with pencil and paper and tried to go back to that moment when I saw the thing in the doorway and just kind of let my mind float and draw what I had seen. What I ended up with was bizarre and frightened me so badly, I just threw the drawing away and tried to forget about it. I had drawn an insect-like head with big eyes, a kind of robe outline, and these insect-like arms and hands coming out of slits on the side of the robe. I can still close my eyes and see that thing in the doorway. Some details really stuck out at me, but others are so vague it's impossible to really describe them. I remember in detail two nub-like things on its head but have only the vaguest sense of stalks or antennae coming out of them. And I remember the way the arms looked but can't really remember what the hands looked like or what they were doing. I remember the eyes but only remember an impression of two slits where a nose would have been, and I don't remember a mouth. I have only the vaguest sense of a robe or flowing cloth of sorts, but I remember the slits where the arms came out of it. Over the years I have tried to convince myself that because of the vagueness of some of the details it must not have been real, but it still bothers me to this day. And I am still sure I saw something. I have never had the nerve or desire to tell anyone else about the experience, and I don't want anyone to think I'm unstable. Even if I had wanted to tell someone about it, who would I tell? What good would it do? But I read in your book that some people have described an insect or praying mantis as being that they have seen. I hadn't heard about that before. It sent a volt of electricity through my body like an adrenaline rush, and I got butterflies in my stomach. Everyone knows about greys thanks to the movies, never seen one, never want to, but if other people have seen the big insect thing, maybe there really was something in my doorway that night. If other people have seen this thing, maybe they will feel better if they know I saw it too, even if only for a few seconds.
I often wonder if all of us have been abducted at one time or another, but only a few of us can remember. I had an odd experience as a child, but I cannot say I was ever abducted. When I was 4 years old, we lived in a small wartime home in Hamilton, Ontario, on what we call the mountain, but it's an escarpment. We had the windows open in the house as air conditioners were not common in 1968. It was very hot that night. I shared a room with my brother and sister. I woke up during the night and looked out the window into the backyard, and in front of a bush about 8 feet away was a small thin creature with shiny black skin. It looked like a small girl, but at the same time it kinda looked like an insect. It was crouched on its legs and was leaning forward with one hand on the ground and was looking at me. It had what looked like thin antennas or like needles sticking out from each side of its head and one on top. That's all I remember, and when I told my mom, she said it was a dream. We moved to Caledonia to a large house in 1972. I now slept in my own room on the second floor. My dad and I did a project where we made a crystal radio. Some people may remember this kit from Radio Shack. I woke up one night in the summer with the windows open and I looked down into the backyard. I saw the antenna for my radio stretched across the yard, but below that there it was again on the edge of the grass, crouched down next to the patio under my window. Again, my mother said it was a dream. A few years later we moved again, so my dad did not have to go far for work to Stony Creek, Ontario. I was now about 15 years old, and I got up in the night and looked out my window and saw it again crouched on the edge of the sidewalk and on the grass in the front of the house. This time I went outside to look and it was there. I walked to the sidewalk and it did not make any noise. It just looked at me. It was all black with large black eyes. I then remember waking up and don't remember going back inside. I wrote it off as a dream. Many years later, I am not sure these were just dreams. There was an article where a UFO crashed in either Mexico or South America, and the sketches the people made looked like my dream creature without the antenna, and the pictures showed red eyes and not black. The red eyes may just have been to jazz up the story. Makes me think though.
I had been struggling all night to fall asleep due to sinus pressure and our clingy cat, and when I finally fell asleep I was on my back, which is usually uncomfortable for me. As soon as I felt myself fall over the edge and into dreamland, I seemed to wake right back up. I was frustrated and disoriented for a second when I realized there was something in my room. Now usually when I dream, I'm immediately aware it's a dream. Colors are oversaturated, people are more exuberant, some things are always off in my surroundings. I never dream vividly of any one location to where I doubt if I'm dreaming or not, but this time room was undoubtedly my room. My husband was snoring softly next to me. I heard the AC kick on. The fan at the end of the bed had its blinking red power light, and then the light was blocked as something shifted in front of it. There was something sitting on my stomach, blocking the light from the fan and the hallway. I was startled, of course, but didn't feel any urge to scream. For a split second I stared at the thing and it stared at me, assessing each other. It had a vaguely heart-shaped face, with ridged brow bones that joined together in a distinct rounded M shape, and behind the brows was a noticeable and horizontally elongated cranium, which reminded me of the aliens in the Indiana Jones movie. Under the brow bones there were deep, round recesses like an owl or something, and large black eyes that were more rounded than you usually see in depictions of your typical aliens. Under the eyes the face started to taper off before rounding into a recessed chin, and I don't recall ever seeing a mouth due to the darkness in the room. The rest of the creature was skinny, long, but altogether it weighed less than my toddler. My husband made a soft snorting noise in his sleep and the alien creature turned its head sharply to glance at him, and from the side its face was completely flat. Almost like E.T. It looked back to me. Delirious from sleep, or lack thereof, I reached up with sluggish arms and pressed the palm of my left hand against what should have been its cheek and temple. My right hand formed a loose fist, and I gently touched my knuckles to its other cheek/temple. Its skin was leathery, thin, and kind of loose. It felt like how an Annalise lizard almost, sort of cool to the touch but with a gentle underlying warmth to it. Hard bone just underneath the skin meant that there was almost no fat layer between them. It started making soft ticking noises, and tilted its head against my hands, leaning forward very slowly. The ticking intensified, deepened, and slowed down as if time itself was slowing. There was a rushing noise in my ears, my hands fell to my sides as limp as overcooked noodles, and my eyes rolled back in my head. In my last second of consciousness I recall thinking, "Oh God no," and I used every last bit of my strength to roll to the side, hoping to force the thing off of me somehow. As soon as my face connected with my husband's shoulder, I woke up properly and sat straight up in bed. The thing was gone. 2 seconds after I sat up my 2-year-old started screaming, not her usual cry for a clean diaper or a bottle, but a scream. I shot out of bed and got her, cuddled her, and jumped at small noises until she had fallen back to sleep. I also feel the need to add that this was written the morning after the incident, about 2 years ago. I never Googled anything about these creatures and tried not to think about it after the fact. Today, I was convinced to upload this from my documents file because I got the urge to Google some things and found out that people apparently hear these things clicking as a way of communication. That's too coincidental for my comfort levels.
One evening in 1948, a young Bremerton, Washington woman named Virginia was going about her usual daily household chores. She had been carrying a load of laundry down to the washing machines in the basement of her run-down apartment building. It was a mindless chore she had done countless times before, and there would have been no reason for this time to be any different. But it was to prove to lead to a shocking experience, indeed. The dim basement was very large, its floor was constantly covered with a sheen of water that leaked from the walls. Virginia was used to working in this dark and dank place. Yet on this day something was not quite right, as she felt an undefinable sense of unease and dread, as if she were being watched from the shadows clinging to everything in there. She tried to cast the odd feeling out of her head, chalking it up to nerves. She would say of what happened next.
It was such a creepy feeling I finally turned around and looked toward the back of the basement, and froze. I was so scared I could still feel it. I couldn't move. In one of the huge holes in the basement there stood this thing. It was horrible. I stand 5 feet tall, and this creature was as tall as I was. It had a bright orange-colored body, and little spidery thin legs and antennae on its head that kept moving back and in and out. That thing started towards me. I backed out of the basement and got up to my apartment, and packed up all my things and moved. I was so scared. I moved over to Seattle to visit my cousins. No one would really believe this, but as God is my witness, it really happened.
She would say that it looked to her almost like a humanoid shrimp or mantis, and that for years afterwards she says she had potent, chronic nightmares. The interesting part of this tale, other than the sheer outlandishness of the entity described, is that this was in the basement of an apartment complex, and not even a remote one out in the boondocks. At the time, Bremerton was a bustling naval port city home to around 80,000 people, so it makes no sense at all that there should be this thing, even if there were passageways to the sea. Where did it come from and why didn't anyone else see it? The strange abomination was only seen this one time, and we are left to wonder just what it could have possibly been.
I just want to share an experience I had about 2 years ago in the Sequoia National Forest. My sister took my friend and I out there, and we were deep in the forest, far away from civilization. We were having a great time. I'm a believer in the paranormal, Bigfoot, aliens and all that stuff, but while I was there, I never had that thought. I was there camping with my family, having a great time. At about 9 o'clock, everyone decided to go to sleep and my friend and I were left staring at the bonfire. I decided it was a good time to listen to music, so I went to my sister's Forerunner and I was opening the back to grab my iPod. And as I opened the back door, I heard something come out of the tree. It didn't come out of the tree. It was almost like it was holding on and it fell. And I heard this huge thump. I could feel it. And as I had a flashlight on me. I looked over at the tree I heard the fall from, and I swear on my life and I swear to God, honest to God, I saw a 6 to 7 feet tall praying mantis. And as I laid eyes on it, I completely lost breath. I was completely taken aback. It took a step back and it became completely invisible. I could not believe what I saw. I slammed the door and I ran back to the campfire. I alerted my friend. I woke everyone up and no one would believe me. I was really upset because I knew what I'd seen. So that happened and my friend didn't believe me. He was laughing at me, and then all of a sudden I could hear all these things surrounding us, and finally when I brought it to my friend's attention, he kinda put his ear to it and he heard it too. Finally, I was patrolling the campground with my flashlight and I could just hear these things surrounding us, and I heard like this clicking sound. It was like making a clicking sound. It was really strange. I was so scared.
We were having a family and friends get together to celebrate a birthday. During the celebration, 2 of my nephews and a niece came tearing into the house, screaming at the top of their lungs, saying that a plane crashed in one of the adjacent pastures. My brother, myself and about 3 others walked outside to see what was causing all the ruckus. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary except a strange burning smell that smelled like burning mesquite. We didn't think anything of it since it was kind of nippy and someone could have been burning some wood in their fireplaces. We told them to show us where they saw the plane go down, and we walked over to the place they showed us. The first thing we noticed was that all the dogs in the area were going bonkers. They were barking up a storm, like they were all seeing the same thing. The area we live in is pretty much a rural community. Unless you live in the city of Monahans, Texas, many of the houses are set on large plots of land, usually 4 or 5 acres per house. Although we can see the houses of many of our neighbors and we do have traffic on the road, you do get the feeling of being all to yourself out here. Some of the land by our house is overrun by wild mesquite trees. Only a small portion of the land surrounding the house is cultivated and cleared out. Beyond the stand of trees runs a small barbed wire fence that separates us from our neighbors, who I could see were home from the lights on in the house. We walked around the edge of the trees, not wanting to really go into the stand at night. Even though it's technically winter, there could be rattlesnakes seeking shelter in amongst the trees, not to mention that mesquite trees have some wicked thorns that protrude from them. They are razor sharp and quite capable of punching through a pair of jeans or boots, and they hurt like hell to get out. As we looked around, we started noticing a sort of electrical charge to the very air around us. Almost like the kind you feel when you approach a large electrical substation or a charged and active radio antenna. As we made our way around the trees, one of my brothers noticed some light peeking through the trees. I told him it was probably one of the neighbors leaving or coming home. He promptly told me that it couldn't be headlights because the light seemed too diffused and not as concentrated as a car's headlight. We moved around, and as we cleared the stand of trees, we were shocked to see an oval-shaped object hovering, maybe 4 to 5 feet off the ground. We stood there in total shock and awe. I can only imagine that our jaws were probably on the ground. As we stood there watching this object hover there without a sound, I took note that the object was maybe about 30 or 40 feet from front to back. It was maybe the same dimensions around. The object seemed to be of a highly polished material that reflected the area around it. The reflection of the distant street lights from the surrounding neighbors' properties seemed to reflect off the surface of the object. There was also a small dull glow to the object, barely noticeable unless you were really looking, almost like an aura of sorts, an iridescent blue of sorts. As we stood there in total shock, my brother next to me expressing his disbelief, we saw 2 strange-looking men appear from around the object. They at first didn't notice us. They were busy running around and gathering objects from the ground, from the trees. They didn't seem to notice us at first. They looked to be about the size of my oldest nephew, about 4 feet tall, but they looked very skinny, like they had no meat on their bones. Their heads were large and their arms were long, skinny, and hung down around their knees. About this time my 2 nephews came walking up behind us, scaring the hell out of us. They saw the object and the strange men, and in a voice that only a kid can project, screamed out loud, "What are those things?" That's when the creatures turned and noticed us. The sight of these creatures was something that will haunt me till the day I die. It turned and looked right at us. Its eyes were large, almost like the eyes of a praying mantis, except they were jet black and wrapped around its head. The two creatures looked at us for about 7 seconds, not an ounce of movement, before they calmly walked around the craft, one right after the other. They disappeared behind the craft and we never saw them again. A few seconds later the craft lifts up, not a sound coming from the object, no rush of wind, not even a swaying of the nearby branches of a mesquite tree. It rose quietly and hovered about 40 feet from the ground, and shot out like a bat out of hell. As it zoomed away, it started glowing and made it easier to track as it zoomed away, getting higher and higher till it faded away. We stood there in complete silence as we tried to make heads or tails of what the hell we just saw. My brother finally piped up and said, "Should we call the police?" After which, I burst out in laughter and replied to him, "And tell them what?" My nephew looked like he had just seen the devil himself, which, considering what we just saw, I don't blame him. He didn't want to talk about it, and after we made our way back to the house, he still didn't talk about it. I tried to ask him about it yesterday and he basically told me that he didn't want to think about it yet, he was still processing what had happened to him. I was more than happy to leave it at that.
My story is from 1988. I was just moving out of the house for the first time. I moved to Crestline with a couple buddies. This story involves my buddy Nate and myself. He was helping me move into my room, and by then, we moved most of my things and it was the end of the night, probably around 10 p.m. My room was facing the back of a slope of the hill. And right above the hill was another house and there's no fences, so neighbors and the kids, I noticed, throughout the day, were playing and just going through the yard. You know, no big deal. When my buddy and I were in the room, we looked out the window and we saw a couple kids. And it was pretty late at that time and very dark. The kids were just playing around, having a good time. I go and get another beer for Nate, and when I come back, he says, the kids went away. And there was just one girl left and it's kind of weird. We're looking, trying to see if she was okay because she was just standing there, kind of just facing, I guess, east. When she started moving slowly, and we noticed that. I don't know if it was the moonlight or what, but her skin started becoming paler. Yeah, it was really weird. She was dressed in normal clothes. Just at that time, she started to put her head up and started looking around. We didn't say anything because we were already freaked out, but then when she looked at us, her eyes were all black. Then maybe a couple seconds later, it was almost a reddish black. Really weird. That right there freaked us out and we slammed the window shut and put the blinds over it. And as we just peeked through the window, just to see what was there, it was almost like it was, I don't want to say skinwalker, but it was almost like a creature, something out of Men in Black. It was all quiet, but it wasn't a girl anymore. It was almost like a man-like body, but the arms and the legs were almost double-jointed and it was walking, very, almost crab-like. It was very weird, you know. At that point, it was just screaming like crazy. So, at that point, we just ran down the stairs and we were trying to contemplate whether, if we should just get in the car. We stayed inside for about an hour and my buddy Nate and I were having anxiety through the roof. And, at one point, Nate decided to just say screw it and let's just get out of here. We ran down through the deck, got in the car, and luckily the car was an automatic. You know, the button, you can just press it and it opens. Well, when we were backing up, you have to go slow on the very tip where it gets onto the main street from your driveway or else it'll scratch the back of the car. But, at that point, we were going too fast. He went backwards too fast, and when it hit the bottom of the tow hitch, it was so fast that the truck went back on it, that the front end went up and we were vertical basically for, maybe, 30 seconds, freaking out. I kid you not. At that point, I was able to use my body weight to push the car forward, and when it went down forward, we looked down and there was the creature right in front of us. We were just cold. It was human it was almost a man's body, no hair, but it was just a pale creature, but it was almost like an insect, but its arms and legs were both disjointed. It was the craziest thing. It was exactly what a praying mantis looks like, the arms and legs.
Location, Catalina Island, California. Date, 1967. Time, evening. 12-year-old Paul Nelson, pseudonym, was visiting the island with his parents. Also along was Paul's best friend, Michael. The two boys decided to go inside their boat and read some new comic books. Suddenly, however, they both experienced an episode of missing time. Their next memory was of waking up the next morning. While Paul was unable to convince his parents that anything unusual had happened, both Paul and his friend knew that the event was strange. 2 weeks later, Paul was alone in his Reseda, California home when he had another strange experience. He was alone in his room when the door began to rattle. He jumped up and threw it open. To his shock, he saw the shadow of a small figure running down the hallway. He chased after it, but found nothing. Paul didn't know how to explain these experiences and didn't connect it to the UFO phenomenon. Many years later, now married and a doctor, Paul underwent hypnosis to recover his lost memories. As Paul underwent regression, his first surprise was that he was not aboard a UFO, but instead appeared to be in an underground base. Paul says he was taken to a round-walled room. It seemed to him that it was more of an underground facility than on board a ship. The walls had a kind of rock-like facet to them. And he was lying on a rock-like table. It gave the impression that he was in a cavern rather than in a ship. Under hypnosis, Paul recalled his friend Michael nearby, also being examined. His next surprise was that the beings were not what he expected. The beings were not the typical greys, they were more like the praying mantis type. They were slightly bigger than the greys and a little more insectoid-like. They wore tight-fitting uniforms. There was even a color to them, but he couldn't recall what the color of the tight-fitting jumpsuit was like. Things. He thinks that there was one in the group that wore a tunic-like outfit, more loosely fitting over it. He couldn't tell how tall they were since he was lying on his back. But they didn't look particularly tall. Location, near Medford, New Jersey. Date, 1962. Time, 18:15. The pregnant witness was on her way to see her doctor and was on a well-traveled road when she happened to glance up at the sky and saw a huge purple moon-like object. She pulled over to get a better look. The object then seemed to fade out and became another color. It turned from purple to blue, green, orange, and silver. It kept spinning and fading out. Next thing she knew, she was at her doctor's office in 1930. Her face had acquired a suntan-like burn. Years later, under hypnosis, she was able to remember more of what had happened. Apparently, she was taken inside a craft in what looked like a large eye that opened up under the craft. Inside, she was in a small white room, where she was pushed against a wall by a creature resembling a praying mantis. There was a metallic slab behind her. Two short white pale creatures with large black eyes then dressed her. She was told that she would not be harmed, apparently by telepathy. A reptilian-like creature now entered the room. She was then led through the craft. When she passed a black room, she felt that it was not a comfortable place to be. She also passed a gold room. She wanted to go there but was told she was not ready. The next room was small and pale pink in color. The room contained 20 incubators, 10 on top and 10 on the bottom. She was shown what appeared to be petri dishes with embryos. In the 20th incubator, she saw a baby with a very large head with aqua-colored slanted eyes. His hair was very sparse. The witness felt an immense love towards the apparently hybrid baby. She was then led into a pale blue room. There she saw 20 more incubators. There appeared to be creatures resembling tadpoles in these petri dishes. Each incubator had a fetus in a more developed state, and when she looked into the 20th incubator, she saw a baby reptilian-like creature. The whole time, two short pale creatures and a tall reptilian accompanied her. Later she was led to a pale yellow large room resembling a courtroom. It was very misty inside. At that point the reptilian creature left her side. She was then led to the front of the room by the two short pale creatures. She then saw 7 beings all wearing cloaks. One looked human, one alien, and one was tall, good-looking, of Nordic appearance that seemed to be the leader. He told her that she was judged, tested, and passed. She had no idea what he alluded to. At one point she looked at the Nordic humanoid at an angle, and he looked like a hologram. Then she noticed what appeared to be a small thin wire going into her arm. She heard strange sounds, and the tall blonde humanoid told her that they had given her knowledge and she would know what to do when the time was right.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.